Welcome to Bonded Voices. This episode
But
is...
you didn't just start it.
What?
It's not welcome. It's whose story is it to tell? And then you say, well, this is Bonded Voices. That's what we just said.
It's not your story. Welcome to Bonded Voices. I'm Ian.
I'm Greg.
This is Lauren.
And tonight we're going to talk about this issue because it's kind of a big one when you see people living vicariously through friends or through their kids or through others. And at the end of the day, it's a great lesson to learn that it's not your story. You may be a spectator, you may be a participant, but ultimately, in these instances, the story belongs to somebody else. And so, let's dig in.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic with people get so involved in and so wrapped up in other things. And we've had other conversations, sipping on a cup of coffee, about what is truly important. And while the story of your loved one is very important, but it's their story. It's not yours. It's their path.
You know what it reminded me of as well? Someone said it at a church tonight, how men love to fix things for their wives. And that's that same sort of thing, right? It's your wife's story. And for us to come in and fix it, we almost go, oh, no, you just don't know what you're doing. We'll fix it all for you. And you become part of it rather than just sitting and listening and taking that back seat and going, okay, spill.
Yeah, I see we do it with our kids quite a bit.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to see them fail, and so, oh, well, I know it's best. And there's a lot to be learned with each failure.
And that's a great point with the failure piece. Is this one of these elements that makes us inject ourselves? Is that we want to save people, don't want them to fail, and so therefore we inject ourselves in and we become part of it, and we almost take it over in a lot of ways.
Well, I think it's a sign of human compassion that we want to help someone else.
True.
And we want to make their challenges, we want to help them with their challenges. But to your point, Lauren, it's their story, it's their scars that will help develop their character. And I've had a number of conversations with my kids recently, and I keep thinking about when you drive down a road and see a beautiful old gnarled tree with all kinds of character, and you think, how many storms did that tree survive? How many different environments did that tree go through to develop the character that it has now?
So let's give some concrete examples. Let's go around and give some relatable stories that people can, get their teeth into and maybe relate it to something in their own life. Do you want to go first, Lauren?
Sure. Something that comes to mind readily, we all have kids in sports, so there's a lot of drama that comes around sports. And did little Johnny make the team or did he not make the team? And do we need to do this or do that to make sure that he's got a spot on the team or whatever it is? We just need to let the kid, or little Johnny in this case, figure out if that's what they really want to do. Yeah, are they doing this sport for us? Do they even like the sport? A lot of us dads and around the little league world, we're like, oh yeah, we're going to play at the next level. We're going to play at the next level, but it's not us playing at the next level. It's the kid playing at the next level.
It's your pocketbook. Well, it's the kid that's playing.
And you mentioned something earlier, which is that drive. If you can't get your kid to work out harder than they should or whatever, again, you're injecting yourself in there and becoming part of it, but they have to take that on themselves.
Right, it's that self-discipline to have that work ethic to get better, to put in that extra effort.
So what I'm thinking about is a situation where a different situation, not necessarily did little Johnny make the team, but maybe something that was more of a challenge for the child, maybe a health battle, maybe something along those lines. And if I fully envelop myself in that story, then that story becomes my life. And it also becomes my child's life, where they may want to break when they talk with me. Maybe they don't want to talk about an illness or whether or not they made the team or who they're having difficulty with at school or whatever it might be. And so I think when we take that step back and let them live their story, we give them an out, an opportunity to shift gears and not let that be the all-consuming thought.
Yeah, well, yeah, if we make a big deal out of it, then the kid, in essence, has to make a big deal out of it. Otherwise, they're not, why aren't you making a big deal on it?
Sure.
And it's a good point, because when you think about suffering, if you become emotional about it and someone else is suffering and you're making it your story and it's really theirs,
mm-hmm.
the person who is actually suffering may look at you and think, it's not you that it's happening to, and that's a really bad dynamic. And yeah, you can say, well, I feel for you, but it's like, well, stop and be supportive,
mm-hmm.
rather than being a blithering mess because I'm going through this.
Right.
Which I think you see a lot when tragedy does strike, that people tend to crumble because I think they impart themselves too much into that situation, too much into that story.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a noble cause. I think people aren't doing this with malicious intent. They want to help that individual. They want little Johnny to find the success that they want little Johnny to find. But if little Johnny doesn't trip and scrape a knee and bump an elbow, the little Johnny doesn't figure out, no, wait a minute, I got to get my feet moving faster when I want to run than what I have been doing. And that's why I keep falling down.
It's the learning process.
Yeah, and you've got to let people fail. You've got to let people find their own way and become independent and self-determined in things. And they'll never be if you're always there catching them.
And is it something that we've picked up as being helicopter parents that,
yeah,
our parents, kind of let us alone, did whatever we wanted to. And now we've kind of overcompensated for that, maybe?
Well, you bring up a good point, because you think about if your child comes home and says, oh, Baba was picking on me at school today. Now, there's obviously all levels of that. But the immediate want for a parent to go, that's it, we're going down to school now, I'm going to sort this out.
Mm-hmm.
I know my kids are like, no, you're not going to do anything about it. You're just going to let it go. Because they want to sort the stuff out themselves. But I think there's a lot of parents who immediately want to inject themselves into that. Again, like you said, a protection.
Sure.
But in the long run, that's not a good thing. It's better for the child to figure out a way to sort that out.
Well, eventually you're not going to be there, and then
right.
Well, but even before it gets to that point, hopefully that's long term down the road. But for the child to learn conflict resolution, as weird as it might look from our point of view, how'd you solve that? What are you doing? What's going on? They're still learning those skills of how are they going to be an independently contributing member of society. And if we continue to step in and wave the magic wand and make these things go away, then what happens when something really bad happens to them? And then maybe we're not around. Maybe we're on the other side of the country, or maybe we're on a cruise, or whatever it might be. They didn't develop conflict resolution.
So there are a few topics, right, where the person whose story actually is either suffering or going through a struggle. You are listening to Bonded Voices. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast service or on the web at www.bondedvoices.com. Thank you to all our sponsors, and now back to the show. flip this a little bit, right? Where, and I think we've all seen it in life, where somebody is doing great. They may have a business that's starting to boom, or just things are going great in their life, and people want to jump on board. And I think of things like lottery winners, where all of a sudden, like a family of 4 becomes a family of 22, right? Because they've won the lottery. And I same way in work situations, where someone's on the path to being successful with a project, and all of a sudden, I didn't know 5 of us were working on this, and people have become part of that story, even though they never were.
Right.
So you got that side of it to look at as well, right? And I think I've seen it in the work world, and I've seen it both sides, where people are struggling and you inject yourself to try and help them get ahead, again, rather than let them being self-determined. But then there's the other ways where, like, this project's going to change our company. I need to be on that party bus.
Yeah, the term that comes to my mind is stop riding my coattails.
Which is the same thing as, like, you're not sure. It's not your story. You should be celebratory, and you should be cheering them on, but not riding the coattails.
But how does someone learn the skills to not demonstrate that behavior? Let's go into the workplace situation, and let's say that 3 people were put on this pilot project to do X, Y, and Z, and as they're building momentum and success, and they're getting accolades within the organization, then all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 more people that are like, oh yeah, I'm now on the project, I'm on this project too. As a survival method for them, wanting the notoriety within the organization as well, because they want to climb the food chain. What do you got going on, Lauren? Deep thoughts.
I'm really trying to wrap my hand around this whole the positive side. Well, not positive, but the coattail thing. And like, how does one get into projects that will? Do they do this because they don't have something going? Like, is the riding the coattails or altering the story because they don't have enough going on in their own life?
Mm.
And how would you go about getting more story, behind your own life?
Well, you can think of it from, like, a sales and marketing and product point of view, where all of a sudden maybe it's a champion salesperson who's got the industry buzz in there. They just know all the right buttons to hit when they're doing presentations, but all of a sudden everyone in product who had a part in it but not in that part of it, and everyone in marketing who again had part of it but not in that part of it, is, hey, we're all in here, we're all here for you, we're all here to take the accolades for this. And yeah, they have inputs, but I think there's a point where you should sit back and celebrate that salesperson is winning.
Well,
and the work that they've done.
And I understand that part of it, but how would someone go about adding to their own story so that they have a story to tell instead of just looking at others?
Good point.
I think that's the key, is like, when people have their own story to tell, they care less about riding the coattails, and they don't care so much about the kids doing their, I got to, be the social warrior for my child's, academic career or athletic career, and I've got my own story to tell.
So I think on that idea, there's several levels of this, right? Which is, one, getting involved physically and actually in that story. The other is getting involved emotionally in it. And then the other may be actually, there's maybe a third, which is, I don't want to say spiritually, but that passive aggressive silence that some people inject, where they're like, you can sort of feel the tension a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they're injecting themselves into it rather than staying out of it and being independent of it.
That's interesting. I was kind of thinking about this too, is, when you look at sports teams and how people jump on the bandwagon.
Oh, yeah.
And it's let's just say the Diamondbacks last year, how they had this glorious run last year,
Sure.
right? And so we sit here and think, oh, now we try to inject ourselves into that story.
Well, but there's a bit different because they want that fan base. The D-backs want people to get on board on the bandwagon, be part of that story. I think they may even advertise along those sort of lines, like be part of the history of the D-backs, or the D-backs run for the championship. That's one thing, but most of the time it's uninvited.
But even the invited, is that good for your own self? Because you get so wrapped up in it.
Well, I think it depends on if you're, and to go even to a different level on this, we went back, if we look back to an earlier podcast, we spent some time talking about certain friends that are always one-upping, and certain friends that are just trying to make their stories better than yours. Oh, you just bought a new house? I just bought 2. Oh, you bought 2 homes? I just bought 4. And that, I think that personality also fits in this particular scenario of, oh yeah, I've always been a Diamondbacks fan. Of course I've always been a Diamondbacks fan. Really? I've never seen you wear a t-shirt. I've never seen you talk about going to a game. Oh, I've always been a huge fan. You just haven't seen me do that. And so they're overcompensating for something at some point. But if we go, and I want to regress a little bit here, what is the long-term gain for someone to actually take ownership of somebody else's spotlight? So if we go back to the topic tonight, it's not your story to tell. What's a positive in that environment? Let's take the little Johnny scenario, plays sports, parents really active in that, and that's all they talk about at work, and that's all they talk about in their friend group.
That's a great thought. Yeah, what is the positive out of that? Because I think for the parent, I don't think it is positive, because I think it's an emotional roller coaster. So in that scenario, I don't think there's a positive. I think in the work scenario, the positive is cashola.
Sure. Potential promotion, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Oh, we really value you. You're now in the fold. You're tenured. You're never going to be let go, whatever that might be. But in the situation that I think more of us deal with on a daily basis, specifically with the raising of our families and being as active as we are in that process, is I think we need to take a moment and think about, what's the long game in this? Am I helping or hurting in this?
I think most of the time it's probably hurt. And I think of an instance, mum's giving birth, mother-in-law turns up on the scene, and all of a sudden the baby's in the mother-in-law's arms, and the mother's laying in that bed going, it's my child.
Sure.
And I think that you've seen that play out in movies, and it's obviously part of real life because it plays out so often. Again, that's where I think having that self-awareness of where that line should be.
Right.
Am I in that story, or am I on the edges of it as an observer and cheering them on and happy for them?
Well, and I think you really need to have your own story. So you need things in your life that is your own story, because if you don't, it's very easy to go, well, this is the only story I have. It becomes mine.
Yeah.
So people have to learn to have, whether it's a hobby or some other interest that they can wrap themselves around and have their own story about something.
Go ahead.
If I ask half jokingly, so if we go hiking together, am I part of your story? Yeah. Is that your mountain?
Well, depends on the day.
Yeah.
Who takes the first step?
Who's the first one to post on social media? That's whose mountain it is.
It is, yeah. Okay, that's who owns it.
But that's a common conversation starter. What's new? What's going on? What you been doing since the last time we talked? And so then some people might be spinning in their heads, what's new, what's new, what's new? Hey, Johnny made this team.
Exactly.
No. What's new with you? And so I agree. You need to figure out your story.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about people having, I own one house. Oh, I have 2. But when you have those conversations where someone starts saying, "Oh, I remember back in the day when I was playing baseball and I slid into third and I came off the bag," and then someone comes in with another story that isn't trumping it, but is another akin story, and we have conversations. Is that part of a conversation, or is that injecting themselves and actually stop? It's not your story.
Oh man, that's
what
a
I mean?
great question. Yeah, I think that's the ability to read the conversation and read the room.
Because us as guys, we love to war stories.
Sure.
Especially about the same subject.
Yeah.
And it isn't even up in each other, it's just I had that experience
when
too.
I slid into third, it was snowing.
Right.
Yeah.
You talked about it as just a normal day. It was snowing for me.
Yeah.
That's why it was so much more complicated.
But I don't even think it's that up in. It's just another story.
We could be talking about hiking, and I go, I went hiking here, you go there, and you can add to the story if it's relevant and it fits the whole thing. So it's not one, I agree, it's not one-upping.
Right.
It's adding color to a group conversation.
So if a fourth person was listening to our conversation and they heard us talk about hiking, do they go away in the morning and go, "Who was the guy that was the hiker?" And is that it stealing the story? If they go, "Oh, it's Ian's the hiker," and Lauren's like,
"Son of a biscuit, I'm the hiker."
Dang it.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't have the answer for that one. But I think back to the one-upper topic, if it's habitual, then they're a one-upper.
Yeah.
So if they're adding color, like you mentioned, just like a color commentary, watching a sportscast, watching I love listening to baseball. I prefer listening to baseball over watching it. Because just the sounds, there's just something just amazing about that.
Yeah, I used to love great commentators. So now have I stolen your story by saying that?
Yeah. Dang it! So
or at least,
I'm a victim of what
You're a victim of it within the conversation.
But
you need a color person.
That's not a one-upping, though. You're agreeing. Not. You're like, so I would say that would be validating your love of what you're trying to join his.
I just always was thinking about Harry Carey and Vince Scully.
Sure. And the voices just are amazing.
Yeah.
But it was a different experience to listen to the game because you start to mentally see the game play out. It's similar in my mind to reading a book versus watching a movie. If you're reading the book, you're setting that landscape in your mind. You're reading what the author wants you to think about with the character development versus, oh, they cast this individual as this actor. I didn't even see that. I would have thought it would have been this person. But anyway, back to the point, I think that no, Ian wasn't one-upping me. I think he's enjoying the conversation, some shared experiences, which is also a common conversation tactic to try and build a connection with the people that you're having a conversation with. But it's just a matter of if you were to say, oh yeah, but when I was on the moon listening to Vince Scully, that's the way you should do it. Maybe you're in one-upper at that point.
So takeaways.
Or if you're Lauren, soundstage.
So takeaways. Lauren.
So I would start with this. If the story can be just as good without you in it, it's probably not your story. So just evaluate everything you're trying to do.
Wow. I didn't think about it that way. I think it's great to be a cheerleader for people. I think it's great to share a triumphant story or to share that you might have a friend that is struggling with something or a loved one. But there's more significant, I don't know if that's the right term. Sharing that story of someone else, I think, can be more rewarding for the individual who's living through that. It's less about you, it's more about them. When you take on the story, you're trying to make it you. It's their story.
Right. And if you're trying to alter the way the story is being played out.
Sure.
Yeah, I say let people own their own story, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and know when to step in, know when to step away, and create your own story as well.
And know when to ask your significant other, do you want me to help you fix this, or do you want me to listen?
Exactly. Very important. So until next time, I'm Ian.
I'm Greg.
This is Lauren.
And we'll see you again on Bonded Voices.